Hello, everyone. Big welcome to our panelists, as well as all of our guests tuning in today for this timely conversation. It's fantastic to have you with us for our engaging panel today, discussing ESG regulation and policy implications for the tech industry. As we all know, ESG issues are increasingly vital for businesses of all size. These factors are under the scrutiny of various stakeholders like investors, employees, customers, government officials, making a robust ESG strategy essential for technology innovation as well as sustained business growth. But ESG isn't really new, is it? It's been around for a while. It's been considered in various investment aspects, which is why today I'm really excited to have us dive into the exciting world of ESG and its growing impact on the tech industry. We're here to unpack not just the challenges, but also the amazing opportunities that ESG trends and regulations bring to our technology community. So on our panel today, it's going to be all about sharing insights, experiences, and ideas, whether it's understanding the nitty-gritty of regulatory trends or swapping stories about innovative practices in tech. We'll explore how embracing ESG can drive creativity and sustainable growth in our industry. To give us perspective, I'm delighted to introduce you to our panelists today. With us are Shalini Trefzer. Shalini is an AI expert with certifications from Stanford and MIT. Known for her work in cloud technologies, she's been a very critical speaker in the space on AI, as well as how AI impacts business and how it should be adopted. She's contributed to notable projects at global technology and health companies. Shalini's passion for learning and making a global impact shine in her work. So Shalini, welcome to the panel today. Sitting next to me is Meshari Alwashmi, who's the CEO and co-founder of amplifAI Health. He is a leading digital health epidemiologist and an entrepreneur with a decade of experience in marrying technology with traditional medicine. Meshari is a valuable contributor to healthcare research and development. He's a noted speaker who I've had the pleasure to interview on a number of occasions, and he's published in eminent journals like Nature. Thanks for joining us today, Meshari. A big welcome to my colleague and dear friend, Karen Silverman. Karen is the CEO and founder of the Cantellus Group. She is a global expert in AI governance who has advised on antitrust matters, mergers and acquisitions, and crisis management. I like to think there's not a question that Karen can't answer. She's a World Economic Forum Global Innovator, serving on its Global AI Council, and has been recognized by the Financial Times, California Daily Journal, and Women in AI Ethics for her contributions to legal innovation and AI ethics. Thanks for being here. And last but not least, we have Barbara Sondag, a strategic leader in privacy governance at Intuit and data protection officer for Brazil and Canada. With over 2 decades of experience, Barbara specializes in global privacy laws, data protection, and ethical AI development. Also a board member at DataGrade, and she mentors new professionals in the privacy sector. Welcome, Barbara, and thanks for being with us today. All right. I'm really looking forward to a lively, insightful, and most importantly, fun discussion. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey in the audience, exploring how we can work together to build a more sustainable, fair, and responsible future in tech. So let's just dive in. Shalini, I'm going to start with you. How do you see the intersection of ESG principles and digital policy shaping the development of emerging technologies such as AI, blockchain, and even IoT?
I think I'm going to start with my exposure. So I work in the field of AI in sales. So I'm constantly looking at the business applications of AI, and I'm approaching this also from the perspective of my customer. Typically, my customers' enterprises are already on a journey where they themselves are examining their role in the environment, their social role, as well as how they are doing governance. Naturally, when I'm wearing my work hat, I'm always working with the principles of my organization, and I work in high tech. And I always anchor myself within the principles of my enterprise, my organization, our CEO's vision of why we do AI. But I'm here in a private capacity today. And in this capacity, I work with a foundation of a great quote that a colleague of mine had published in one of their journals. And I will give you a link to that journal later on. It's fantastic work about how the year 2050 could look like. They say the future is fiction. It's a story that we write together, limited only by our imagination and our understanding of the world around us. To me, this is a very powerful anchoring statement with which I can think about how technology can be truly used to benefit all. I primarily work around the topics of responsible AI and sustainability within the topics that you've mentioned, Kristina. Naturally, I think some of these principles can be applied further as well to ESG as a whole. When I work with data governance, it's in the capacity of data. I am looking at sustainability as well as data governance from the lens of data, that it's fundamentally a data challenge in my daily life. Most modern enterprises see this opportunity. They also see a need to think of themselves as data companies providing a digital service that solves a set of problems. And those sets of problems could also be how we as humanity are impacting the environment, or how their product is impacting the environment, and so on. One is an anchoring philosophy, if you will, and then comes a framework on top of it saying that it's a collaborative future. We're writing this together. We're co-creating this together. And we'd like this to be a thriving future. And we want for that our business is working in a sustainable manner. When I think about sustainability, governance, AI, I'm thinking about it fundamentally as a data challenge. From this perspective, then I start working with responsible AI and sustainability to move from framework to measurable action. And that's the piece then I can elaborate on further. But I hope this helps to sort of set the ground for how I'm approaching these topics.
That helps tremendously and gives us a lens. So really appreciate that. Karen, what has your experience been, and how do you see the principles and the digital policies shaping the development of emerging technologies?
Part of the answer is increasingly, right? I think up to now, a lot of policy and regulation, particularly in the US, but not exclusively, has really been perceived in large respect, maybe overly so, as prudential and not necessarily as mandatory. And I think that view is changing, both because the regulations are coming into effect with some mandatory provisions, but also the understanding of possibilities are, both in terms of upside and downside, are becoming clearer, right? And the more we're trying and starting to use these emerging technologies in practice and in commercial settings, the more commitment we're seeing to both standard sort of governance practices and also some more innovative ones that are really designed to meet the moment. And so I just think it's all getting more real, right? And so there is more focus on this body of work and, and how to interpret what good governance looks like. That's the part of ESG that I see kind of finally emerging into mainstream conversation and workflows.
Meshari, you use a lot of these technologies day to day, innovatively, creatively. You are an innovator at heart. How do you see the intersection from your perspective, thinking about what policy might imply, and how do you actually adopt the principles of ESG as we move forward?
Absolutely. Most of my work revolves around healthcare. And historically, healthcare has been working closely to make sure that we deal with the governance, as well as society. So everything that we do, we want to make sure that we help the society. So traditionally, these two aspects of the ESG have been heavily practiced, although there is new challenges that continue to emerge with the governance piece as we continue to leverage AI and try to use AI more. With regards to the environmental piece, I don't think that has been taken as much as the other two. And I believe when it comes to healthcare, we can definitely benefit more from policies around the environmental impact, leveraging that more.
Great. Thanks so much. And Barbara, last but not least, maybe you can offer us your perspectives. Do they match or differ from Meshari's and Shalini's and Karen's?
Picking up on what Karen mentioned, I think about how the technology within our products and services is impacting the environment and how that also impacts our customers' livelihoods. At Intuit, for example, part of our mission is to be an AI expert-driven company. We're investing significantly into AI ML and generative AI. And as we continue to rely heavily on technology, it's important that we stay focused on making a positive impact on climate. Climate change is a significant issue that directly affects our communities, our customers, both individuals and small businesses, and their opportunity to be more successful. And if our customers aren't successful, then we aren't successful. Intuit has been focused on decreasing its carbon footprint for over a decade by investing in energy efficiency upgrades and procuring renewable energy for our facilities. And that's why Intuit is committed to building resilience so that all communities can prosper in a changing climate. We're on a journey to reach net zero emissions by 2040.
Thanks, Barbara. So, considering the long-term effects of today's choices on digital future of organizations, the question is really how should businesses balance short-term gains with the need for sustainable and also future-proof technology solutions? Meshari, could you share examples of successful initiatives where the responsible use of technology has positively impacted both the environment and society, something that you've seen in practice aligning to those ESG goals?
Absolutely. I think when we want to think about balancing short-term gain with long-term gain, it's important to take two things really seriously. One is communication, and the second one is the research. So before we conduct or leverage any technology, we need to make sure that we are aligned as a business and aligned as whoever is going to use it, whether it's a government or a hospital or whatever it may be. We try to avoid the phenomena called death by pilot. So we make sure that we start a line early on to make sure that we set the right KPIs. Once these standards are met or these KPIs are met, we can turn on a switch to turn it into a long-term, let's say, sustainable project. So that's something that we try to do. An example of a technology that was, from an environmental perspective, is a technology we worked on in the past. We've leveraged a sensor that you can put on top of inhalers that allows patients to take their medications better. And by doing that, it reduces the waste of medication. If you use inhalers, it's actually quite harming for the environment. There's a lot of waste from these inhalers. It's affecting the environment and causing major problems. So by leveraging technologies like these, allowing us to bring it early, we make sure that we reduce a little bit of that impact. I hope that helps.
That's interesting. And I did not know that actually about inhalers. Karen, you do a lot of planning with boards and businesses alike, really helping them balance out that short-term goal with a longer future-proof kind of technology solutions that a lot of corporations are especially looking for. Could you share your experience and examples maybe of what you've seen out there?
The death by pilot comment caused me to laugh because I think we see a lot of that. But one of the areas where we see sort of an interesting, maybe it's a renaissance of some degree. I think because these technologies are moving into the field and into production, like say in these ways that impact customers and employees in a consequential way, we're seeing a little bit more focus, and I think we're about to see a lot more focus on some of the basics, right? The sort of the short-term organizational readiness, data readiness, training, things that aren't sort of the most glamorous piece of sort of tech puzzle, but which are really important foundational and kind of predicate pieces. And so increasingly short-term energy being placed on building more solid foundational structures on top of which then some of these more novel technologies can rest and where agile governance and leadership can more confidently reside. That's by no means is that a universal approach, but I think it is a smart one. And the companies that are taking the time to go back and, particularly for use cases where they think there's going to be a large impact or kind of repeat use cases or areas where there'll be repeat use cases, really making sure they've got their data straight, really making sure they have, an oversight mechanism in place and training mechanisms in place, sort of more fit for purpose principles and workflows. It is sort of the name of the game. And it's something that people can do now in anticipation of, some of the developments to come. I'm just starting to see more capacity building in that way. And then the other area where I'm seeing a little bit more energy being placed is really starting to think through where these technologies are really likely to improve performance and or create competitive opportunity or threat. I would say those are the sort of short-term activities where it's more analytical, but it's a real clear-eyed view of what's going to change in this round of transformation. Creating space and permission structures to have those conversations, even where they challenge, orthodoxy within the organization.
Thank you. And Shalini, Karen just mentioned that organizations need to get their data straight. How do you see businesses balancing the here and now and the long-term interests?
This is so interesting because the death by pilot comment really resonated with me as well as Karen's comment on AI-ready data, if I may paraphrase. This is something that I'm working on as a foundational topic with a lot of organizations. So one of the things that I see, and I'm going to start from the pilot side of things, it's very sexy, if you will, to say, oh, I've got access to generative AI, to large language models, to a combination of very, very capable NLP technologies. Let me do a pilot. I've got some data, and I think I can use that and then generate a workforce enablement, a savings of time, or some manner of productivity increase. And I'll do it within a constrained environment because that's the environment that I have access to. So I would argue that doing this and taking this approach of not thinking through the entire organization or value chain is actually detrimental to the sustainable development of that technology and to create impact that is actually sustainable over time as well, because you're putting a lot of resources into building a pilot. And then what are you going to do? So essentially, you would have gathered that data, processed that data, drawn insights from that data. And once you're at the capacity of that limited business case, you go nowhere else. So it just kind of gets lost. All of that is just sort of now hanging around as artifacts in your data and AI estate. And it's not really helping you as a company get anywhere further. So one of the things that I'm always talking about is the concept of how do you want to benefit from all of your data without actually talking about the technologies of the company that I work for. I can only say that there are concepts and frameworks that I talk about with my customers and in industry, and this typically involves a framework around how to bring the data together. So the more flexibility at the edge, the better, because you want to say that I'm not just looking at time series data. I'm not just looking at structured data. I'm also looking at this big world, for example, in healthcare and in life sciences of unstructured data, right? Imagery, phone calls, voice. I'm also looking at other kinds of medical reports. I'm looking at EHRs. I might be looking at handwritten notes from a doctor. There's a large variety of data coming in. I need technologies that essentially allow me to be very flexible in terms of accepting all of this data, and at the same time to be very, very structured about ensuring that there is a way to access all of this data. There's a framework, a platform, and that it's anchored within enterprise-grade networking, engineering, security, privacy, and protected for an enterprise. So this means that you can easily access all of your enterprise's data, number one. Number two, you should be able to speak across different systems. If you've got some data sitting somewhere on a computer, let's say, standalone, you've got other pieces of your data that's actually coming in from an external system, you've got some data sitting in the cloud, and you want to be able to manage across all of this kind of data and observe them, have oversight of them, and then to be able to transform this data in a way that you can draw insight from all of it. And then when you say, okay, I need insights out of that data, what are you looking at? Typically, you're looking at reporting, you're looking at applying machine learning and artificial intelligence on that data. For all of this, you need a highly integrated stack. The more integrated the services of AI and data are, the more sustainable that solution becomes for you for the future, because it's eliminating waste. It's saying that instead of making a copy of that data and bringing it in, working on a pilot, and then I can't do anything with it. So either I use it in a limited fashion, or when I leave the company, I abandon it. And then you've got copies of that data floating around in different pilots. Instead of doing that, you're saying, I give you a way to access and use your data, keep it where it is. Don't make copies, don't move things around, and at the same time, draw insight from it. And this is what technology can do, and it does do. And the other thing that technology can do, but is not being very used in a very widespread manner, is data sharing, especially if in the healthcare sphere. Patient data is some of the most private data there is on the planet. And it is highly restricted in terms of who can use it, where should it sit, what is the ownership, and all of that. Yet, it's very rich data because if you want to collaboratively develop solutions for humans for their diseases, how do you do this without sharing data? No one organization actually has all of the data necessary these days to come up with innovative cures and also to come up with innovative personalized medicine. So you have to be able to collaborate, you have to be able to share. And that's another topic that I think we need to think about when we think about how we design for AI in a way that's very, very collaborative. There will be some part of it that's proprietary. There's going to be some part of it that you want to share. And there are plenty of technologies around how that data can be shared in a trusty manner. You need to evaluate them. You need to understand with your partners and collaborators what the parameters of that exchange are going to look like. And then you come back to the same issue, which is how do I gather? How do I integrate my sources? How do I integrate my technologies? How do I bring in the data and access all of it, map it, know what it is, protect it, and then draw insight from it?
Thanks so much, Shalini. And Barbara, as I've been listening to Karen and Meshari and Shalini, I'm reminded of what a colleague of mine always says, which is balancing out today's decisions with a sustainable future-proof kind of technology solution set. Feels like we're flying a Boeing 7487 and switching out the engine's connector at the same time. So what is your perspective on this? How do we really get that balance right, especially when there are priorities within the business, their daily operational realities, and yet we're trying to think and future-proof ourselves at the same time?
Someone recently said to me, it's important to be thinking 3 steps ahead. And I think they're right. While we're busy with our current year planning, we need to be thinking about our 3 to 5 year planning, where we want the organization to be. And one of the most important aspects to consider when investing in the digital future is the short versus long-term gains. It may seem more sensible from a risk and cost perspective to focus on the short-term gains to grow your business. However, we found that longer-term gains, let's say 3 years from now, that those longer-term gains, making infrastructure changes, tech stack changes, building for energy efficiency or waste conservation features, those may seem more expensive and uncertain to invest in, but these investments will pay tenfold compared to short-term gains as the technology solutions become mainstream. And you'll find that companies who make these long-term investments are better prepared compared to their peers when the time comes to meet new regulatory requirements in ESG.
Karen, let me go to you first on this next question, because I know that this is something that's near and dear to your heart. Considering the EU AI Act, as well as the White House Executive Order on AI, and just all of these tapestries of regional policies, how do you perceive the role of government regulations in influencing and guiding capital investments in technologies? You touched upon this a little bit earlier, but I want for you to expand a little bit more on that, please.
First of all, it's a really changing space. And every time I haven't figured out if it's Mondays or Fridays where new drafts drop. It seems like every Monday and Friday, there's something that needs to be read that's been proposed. I think the common thread among all of these proposals, some of which are sort of more advanced than others, is that they're trying to set a really, really core baseline, in terms of what good should look like in certain categories. And by that, I mean, there's a very substantial focus on the civil liberties side of things and the human-centeredness. So you'll see a lot of focus around requirements around bias mitigation and access to critical services. So that's sort of a core principle that gets articulated lots of different ways. You'll see increasingly focus on integrating concepts like cybersecurity and privacy into your AI policy. And again, articulated lots of different ways, but increasingly that's a piece of most of these, at least broader scope policy papers and proposed regulations. Increasingly, you'll see a focus on national security. The thing that we're just starting to see, which from my perspective, very welcome, is a little bit more focus on just raw quality standards. Like what is, how do we create good, solid, robust technology, the equivalent of the bridge that doesn't fall down, right? And we started to see that in some of the international compacts that are emerging. And the earliest indicator of this was a reference to tech debt and how, a core principle of secure AI where the tech debt is managed and minimized and kind of mitigated where it has consequence. And I think it's a little thing, but I think it's a really important shift in the focus of some of the regulations towards just good engineering. Not that the first three categories aren't very important, but they're critical. Getting sophisticated enough in regulation to start dealing with, just the raw quality questions as well. That all said, there's a lot of sort of idiosyncrasies among these different proposals, and it's really hard. It would be almost impossible, I would say, to comply with each and every one of them in every possible way. And that's because they're all regulating different things. Some of them are pointed at use cases, some of them are pointed at technologies, some of them are pointed at existential risks, some of them are pointed at applied impact, and some of them are geographically bounded. Just the terrain is uneven. But if you step back and really look at what they're trying to accomplish and what they're trying to articulate and kind of grow into, I think you see some really core themes. And those core themes then get plowed back into both technology solutions, but also governance principles and human, what training looks like around this stuff and what workflows look around this stuff and sort of how documentation is created. So we're starting to see that synapse kind of close, but I think more and more you're going to see real practice reflecting these principles that have been captured, at least in broad stroke, in a whole variety of these proposed regulations.
Karen, when you said the terrain is uneven, it prompted me to think back to 2018 when we actually saw GDPR pop up. And we knew that on the horizon, there were different pieces of legislation. It felt very uneven back then. And one of the things we did was, I think about how we can map the 99 GDPR articles to fundamental areas of practice that could insulate the business, if you will, to help in maybe just making it a little bit easier to traverse that unevenness. Any pieces of advice from you for doing the same thing in this context of ESG?
Absolutely. And that's what I mean by sort of starting to sort of close the synapse between these big principles and sort of what your ordinary practice is. And I think build off existing process and policies and values, because most of the time you're going to be extending kind of known solution sets. I think that the other key thing is to build in agile systems that are adaptable. And when I say systems, I mean not just rules and procedures, but also feedback mechanisms, because those are going to have to adapt quickly. Like GDPR, this is sort of a new way of thinking for a lot of people, but it's not, a lot of it's not completely foreign. And we have to kind of remember that. And we have to start with strategy and risk management, move from there to risk mitigation, and move from there to compliance. I think there's a tendency to want to start, wait for the regulation and start with compliance, but that's a much too narrow perspective on this whole set of issues if what you're trying to do is actually improve your future prospects out in the world. I think it'll improve your ability to talk to regulators. But if you really want to be successful with these technologies, it can't start and stop with compliance. It has to start and stop with strategy and work its way to include compliance in whichever forms are sort of most relevant to your use case, your geography, your industry, your technology. Just keeping the broader picture in mind and keeping agility in as a design concept, both very important. Building off existing policy and practice, also really important.
Barbara, what are the differences between the EU AI Act and the White House Executive Order on AI? Are they aligned, or do you see crucial differences that could lead to misunderstandings amongst industries, leaders, and regulators on a global level? How can we ensure that we address the challenges and future paths for tech developments in a consistent and an aligned way?
It's been really exciting to hear that the EU AI Act has recently passed after more than 2 years of drafting and negotiations. Some of the key differences between the AI Act and the White House Executive Order are around AI systems requirements and enforcement. The AI Act is modeled on EU product safety legislation, meaning that it would impose a detailed set of technical and organizational requirements on what we call providers and users of AI systems. Providers of these high-risk AI systems would bear the bulk of the obligations. Things like data governance, training, testing, validation, risk management systems, and post-market monitoring. The Act also prohibits some uses of AI systems altogether, and it imposes transparency obligations on others. So in contrast, the White House Executive Order does not create any new legislative obligations. Instead, it introduces a number of directions for the government agencies, including instructing the Department of Commerce to develop rules requiring disclosures from companies that develop or provide infrastructure for AI models under certain circumstances. The White House Executive Order is also broader in scope than the AI Act in some respects. For example, it covers social issues such as advancing equity and civil rights and protecting workers. It also outlines requirements related to attracting and retaining highly skilled AI workers. And it also directs the State Department to lead an effort to establish international frameworks governing AI. Another difference between the AI Act and the White House executive order relates to enforcement. The AI Act includes a complex oversight and enforcement regime. And so infringements of that act could incur penalties of up to 30 million euro or 2 to 6% of global annual turnover, depending on the violation. Whereas the White House executive order doesn't contain any enforcement provisions. So in terms of alignment between the two pieces of legislation, I think there is some alignment as they both focus on high-risk AI systems, and they also provide requirements for providers of AI systems. And so an example of that would be that the AI Act adopts a risk-based approach and imposes the most significant compliance requirements on providers of AI systems that it classifies as quote-unquote high risk. And the White House executive order similarly focuses on high-risk AI systems by requiring developers of certain dual-use foundation models to share safety test results and other critical information with the U.S. government. Another place where they align is on AI regulatory, quote-unquote, sandboxes, where developers can test new technologies for a limited period of time. They both also require the development of harmonized technical standards for the design, development, and deployment of AI systems.
And Shalini, you've been actually heavily involved with canton level policies within the Swiss government ecosystem. How do you perceive the role of government in sort of influencing and guiding these capital investments in emerging technologies? What does this look like from your perspective?
So my work with any kind of policy body has been a few years ago, and I think it's been an evolving story, of course, and so much has happened since then. But I believe that governing bodies, government, as well as decision makers in business, have a huge impact in terms of how these principles are taken from being principles to actually being actions and sustainable actions. One of the examples that I'd like to mention there is this concept of responsible AI, as Karen was rightly speaking about. So we know that we would like to see a certain kind of AI. We want AI to be fair. We want AI to be inclusive. We want AI to not be harmful. We'd like it to be transparent because we'd like to know what's behind it. We'd like it to be also measurable in a way, or trackable, if you will. What policy can do here is to influence education, for instance, and require that from a very young age, children are taught about technology advances. They're taught about principles of what it is that they would like to see in their society. How do you build policy? Because technology is advancing at a very, very, very rapid pace, and it's not slowing down. So if you don't learn to ask the right questions about it from a young age and participate in what it should look like, then how are we going to ensure that the technology that's developed is actually the technology that we want? There's also two ways to look at governmental policy from my point of view. One is a more top-down approach, which I've seen in the EU, basically classifying AI. Okay, this is AI which should be forbidden. This is AI which is generally good. This is AI which is harmless or close to harmless, etc. But in my view, the problem with looking at it in this fashion is that it's a constantly changing landscape. How do you define something that's constantly changing and transforming? Perhaps what we would want to do as a society is to say that this is the kind of society I want. This is the kind of education I want. This is the kind of policy making that I'd like to see that's future-proof. And then you build your technology to suit that, to say that, okay, well, I want, in my society, privacy is important. In my society, collaboration is important. In my society, safe data sharing is important. I want to make sure that in this canton, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, universities will have the kind of technology they need in order to safely collaborate with one another. As a policy-making body, you are taking the input of the society that you serve, and together you're co-creating the kind of future you want. And then you're putting in place regulations that govern the technology which is going to make that future possible and scalable. So this approach to me makes a lot of sense. I think the Swiss generally take this approach. There's a lot of dialogue at the village level, cantonal level, city level, that's bringing just different parts of the population together and having public forums, open houses to talk about technology and where they would like to see it in the service of their society. And it's federated. So we'd have to think of how cities and countries, which are maybe not much bigger and not following necessarily a federated model, how can they also benefit from pulling the voices of everyone in?
Thank you. That's very interesting perspective, and definitely appreciate that viewpoint from, I think, what is a traditionally practical Swiss lens, if you will. Meshari, to kind of get to what I like to call a freedom within a framework, where there's a good balance between risk and opportunity, a lot of space still for evolution and technology. What would you like to see from a government regulatory perspective that you think would be helpful, especially from your innovation perspective?
I think we've heard across the panel earlier, transparency is important, collaboration, shared objectives. All of these are great things that we can aim to do. And a good model to bring them together is what you've mentioned, if it's within the framework or the context of the sandbox. A practical example is we have a sandbox here in Saudi Arabia that's focused on healthcare. And being in it has been quite transformative because what they've done, they spent a long time in the beginning to bring different stakeholders from different governments, whether it's the investments, healthcare, IT, and regulations from the security and privacy initiatives as well. They all came in the same table, sitting down together and thinking, how can we enable more innovation in healthcare and potentially in the future other aspects of innovation, so we don't limit it. Because in the past, if I try to do what I'm doing now, it would take years. But by working within that framework, it's allowing me to move much faster. Also, the equivalent to the FDA on the table, willing to collaborate and willing to provide faster approvals have been transformative. It's early stages of it all, but having that environment replicated into other sectors, having more people that understand ESG and its implications is going to be revolutionary for how do we make sure that we can have a sustainable future.
And I know we're getting very quickly through our time together here. So I'm going to be very brief with Barbara and just ask you, Barbara, to jump in and provide your perspectives.
As part of the efforts related to international leadership, the White House executive order also directs the Secretary of State to establish a plan for global engagement on prompting and developing AI standards. So I think there is definitely room for policymakers and leaders to collaborate on further development of standards and best practices. And while it may seem that the AI Act and the White House executive order are two completely separate pieces of legislation, we should expect to see convergence in the coming months within this plan of global engagement on prompting and development. So that will help to streamline compliance for tech companies.
Thanks, Barbara. Looking ahead, I was wondering if you could provide us with your perspective on how can technology leaders and policymakers collaborate? Really, what are some things that tech leaders and policymakers can come together on around ESG and digital policies to really address the emerging challenges and opportunities?
If you were to take a very simple example, I have recently read that as of 2024, the ESG regulations coming in aim to put ESG data at the same level of importance as financial data. So that's a policy, right? That's coming through regulation, impacting how industry approaches their ESG data. So when you think about financial data and you think about all of the regulation around financial data, the reporting requirements around financial data, it's a big deal. So there's a lot of investment which goes into a publicly held company to ensure that their reporting is done timely, accurately, is audited on a regular basis. So all of these mechanisms could also then be applied to ESG data. So imagine what that would look like and the kind of importance it would elevate ESG topics to. So now knowing this, a technology leader, technology company, as well as like all across industry, tech leaders are probably thinking, okay, do I have the governance in place? Do I have, first of all, oversight of my data, if you look at it from a data point of view? And do I have the governance in place, the rules of who can do what with the data? What is my overall governing principles for this data? What does security look like? Where do I keep it? Do I keep it in cloud? Do I keep it on premise? And then what am I going to do around safeguarding and reporting from this data? What technologies will I leverage for that? And I think that in this manner, policy can certainly drive the application of technology. The evolution of technology itself, I think, is moving forward in an unparalleled manner. It is governed by regulations of competition. It's governed by regulations of the various countries where it's being implemented and so on. But I see that these regulations are primarily coming from an application point of view. How is it applied? Where is it applied? What are the guardrails around that? And I think this is how the flow will go, that policy will come up, regulations will come up, and the technology's application is going to be amenable to the enforcement of that policy. So it's not the technology's job to enforce a particular regulation, but to enable the enforcement of that regulation by the organization. And this is where adoption and participation of the people in the organization makes that difference between being compliant to regulation or not. And again, this is how I'm seeing it, and this is my point of view, but a lot of studies and reports certainly back up this kind of thinking.
I really appreciate that, Shalini, because I think it takes us beyond compliance for compliance sake and really to the heart of what we should be doing. Karen, are technology leaders and policymakers collaborating enough, you think, or are there opportunities to further the partnership?
I think they're just starting to learn how to do this pretty well. And there's a lot of room for improvement. And there's a lot of trust to be built up between the public and private sector, particularly in the US, with the exception of a few industries. But that has to change in this category, and I think it will change over time. And we're looking for new pathways all the time to sort of build up that dialogue. And you start to see it in the very active efforts by government to request, information and comment. You see it in private sector by including policymakers in all sorts of workshops and opportunities to kind of present and do listening sessions. That it's still pretty idiosyncratic and not well paved or plumbed lanes, and that needs to improve in general.
Thank you. That's making me feel very, very hopeful, along with Meshari's comments and example of the collaboration around the sandbox in Saudi Arabia, because as you mentioned, Karen, we are definitely still in the early stages, but hopefully we can move in the right direction here. Thank you, Meshari, Shalini, Karen, and Barbara. And thank you for generously sharing your perspectives and experiences. And dear guests and friends, as we draw our panel discussion to a close, I want to express my deep gratitude for sharing your time with us today as well. This discussion has not only shed light for me on the critical intersection of ESG principles with digital policies, it's really enlightened me and really created a spark to underscore the profound impact these elements have on shaping the future of technology. Each of our speakers has brought unique perspectives to the table, enriching our understanding of how ESG can drive innovation and sustainable growth within the tech industry. We've delved into nuances, as you've heard, of emerging technologies, a lot of talk about data, and also how do we balance those short-term gains with long-term sustainability solutions. And also we've explored the intricate role of government regulations and what we can look forward to, such as the example that Meshari shared around the sandbox in Saudi Arabia, or as Karen mentioned, some of the emerging collaborations we're seeing in the United States. The diversity of these views has highlighted the multifaceted nature of ESG issues and certainly the need for further collaboration amongst all of us and also with policymakers to make sure that we have sound technical advancements. As we look past today's session, let's carry with us the key takeaways from today's conversation. The insights shared here are thought-provoking for sure. Hopefully you found them to also be actionable. And I certainly hope that you'll join me in using them as we move forward and towards a future where technology and ESG principles co-evolve for the betterment of our society and our organizations. So thanks again for our distinguished panelists taking their time today and making these invaluable contributions. And thanks for everybody for joining us in this meaningful conversation.